The Joe Rogan Experience.
Why do you think that AI won't be conscious?
The most interesting line of research, well, a couple reasons. The first is the idea that it can be conscious, which is very common in Silicon Valley. I talk to lots of people there, and they say, oh, it's just a matter of time. Some of that is confusion that intelligence and consciousness necessarily go together, and they don't. They have an orthogonal relationship, right? I mean, you know people who are conscious and not too intelligent, right? And we all do. So it's not going to just come along for the ride with intelligence as these machines get more intelligent. But the belief that AI can be conscious is based on a metaphor that I think is a crappy metaphor, and that is that the brain is a kind of computer. And this is widely held. It's interesting to note that in history, whatever the cool cutting-edge technology was, brains were likened to that. So it was looms for a while, it was clocks for a while, it was telephone switchboards, whatever was the cool technology. Surely that's how brains work. Now it's computers. But think about it. In a computer, you have this sharp distinction between hardware and software. That's the key to their success. And you can run the same program on any number of different hardwares. They're interchangeable. Brains aren't like that. There's no distinction between hardware and software. Every experience you have, every memory is a physical change to the brain, to the way it's wired. We start out with all these connections and they get pruned as we grow up. Every brain is shaped by its experience. So this idea that you could separate, that consciousness is some kind of software that you could run on other things besides meat, I just think it doesn't hold up.
Well, if the universe is experiencing itself subjectively through consciousness, why does it have to be only biological consciousess?
It doesn't have to be.
But if there is a technology that is invented that essentially does all the things that a human body does physically and also interacts with consciousness, the consciousness of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, if hypothetically, yeah.
If the universe is conscious, if we are using the mind as essentially an antenna to tune into consciousness,
other things could tune in.
We could make an antenna.
Yes, absolutely. It's also likely that if we are ever visited by aliens, that they will have some kind of consciousness, and it may not be meat-based, right?
Right. Well, it may be at one point in time it was.
Yeah,
they realize that there's biological limitations in terms of its ability to evolve that can be far surpassed with technology.
Yeah, I mean that, or it evolved in a different way,
right?
Or they're channeling it in a different way. But the other reason I don't see it happening with computers as we know them, because that's the debate now, whether these computers we have, that these large language models and the next generation can be conscious, is that the research that I found most persuasive about consciousness is basically has consciousness beginning with feelings, not thoughts. In other words, it's embodied. And I have to just develop this a little bit, but the brain exists to keep the body alive, not the other way around. Although since we identify with our heads, where most of our senses are, we lose track of that. And the body speaks to the brain in feelings, right? Feelings of hunger, itchiness, warmth, cold, but also feelings of shame when our social standing is not, has been damaged. Anyway, we have these feelings. They depend on a body. Feelings have no weight if you're not vulnerable. Your body isn't vulnerable, and probably mortal. So consciousness is embodied in a really critical way, and computers are not. Now, robots will be, and I actually interview a guy, a scientist at USC, who is trying to make a vulnerable robot. So he's essentially upholstering the thing with skin that can tear and be damaged, and he's filling the skin with all these sensors so that it can be like us and be vulnerable and generate feelings that are how consciousness begins. So for a long time, we thought consciousness had to be in the cortex, right? The most human, newest part of the brain, the outer covering. And that's where rational thought and executive function are and all these kind of things. But as it turns out, it really begins with feelings in the brainstem. Let's say you have a feeling of hunger, it registers in the upper brainstem, and only later does the cortex get involved, like helping you figure out how are you going to feed yourself, like imagining, a meal, counterfactuals of different meals, or making a reservation at a restaurant. All those are cortical things, but it begins in the brainstem with feelings. So if that is true, and I find that really persuasive because people born without a cortex are still conscious. Animals that you take the cortex out still show signs of consciousness. Whereas if you damage the upper brainstem, you're out. You're unconscious. So if this is true, and consciousness is this embodied phenomenon that depends on having a body to mean anything, I don't see how machines are going to do that.
But isn't the key word there if?
Yeah, definitely.
Because if consciousness is just something that we're tuning into that's around us all the time.
There will be other ways to do it.
Right.
But it won't be these computers we're building right now.
Why's that?
Because they're designed, they're good at, so here's a paradox of computers. Computers are really good, it's called Moravec's paradox. Computers are really good at the highest kinds of rational thought, right? They can play chess and Go. They can simulate real thinking. And some people say they do think. The more primitive kinds of things that go on in our brain, including elaborate movement, changing diapers, they're very bad at that. You would never trust a robot to do that as much as you might want to. But they're not good at that kind of emotional stuff. The more limbic part of our brain, they can't do that. Yet. It's definitely yet. But, if we go out far enough, anything's possible.
That's the point.
Yeah.
The point is these things, what we're looking at now is essentially a single-celled organism becoming a multi-celled organism.
Yeah.
I mean, the potential for what they could become is unlimited, especially once they start making better versions of themselves. And
they will.
They've done this.
Yeah.
This is what ChatGPT-5 is. ChatGPT-5 is essentially programmed by ChatGPT.
Right.
They've kind of given up on the idea of programming these things.
They're doing
they're
it
letting
themselves.
them program themselves.
Yeah.
Which is a dumb idea if you want to survive.
I agree. Look, the idea that we give rights to these machines or personhood, I think is really stupid because then you lose control completely.
Right. Well, it's probably coming because people are very short-sighted. And I think there's a romantic idea that you're creating a life. And I think there's also the real risk that people are going to worship this life and that this life will be far superior to what we are. And so there'll be a group of people that's their new religion.
Yeah, no, there are signs of that already.
Yeah.
I think that's really dangerous. It's interesting talking to Silicon Valley people, and they're talking about giving moral consideration to these machines. It's like, really?
They're thinking about yachts. They're just coming up with rationalizations for why they should keep their foot on the gas.
Well, yes, they are. I mean, it's just all a way of saying, look how powerful this technology is. Don't you want to invest?
And it's also the idea that we have enemies. And so we have to develop before they do.
Yeah, the race with China. Yeah. I think it'll turn out to be a real historical tragedy that this technology came of age during this administration, because this administration has no stomach to regulate it at all.
But can they?
They could.
But here's the question. If it is a national security threat, like if China developing all-powerful general superintelligence that can automate everything, do everything. It's dangerous if they get that before we do.
Yeah, but look what happened with nukes, right? We made deals, right, to control them. I mean, we'd have to make,
Right, but why would you make a nuke? A nuke deal makes sense because it's mutually assured destruction for everybody.
Yeah.
This doesn't. You could run it and control everything and not kill anybody with it, but you're incredibly powerful. You are in control of all the resources of the world, all the computer systems of the world, all of the power grids, everything.
Yeah, but if you're really concerned with that, why is Trump selling these chips to China? Why is he willing to give away the crown jewels of
So
these chips.
selling them through NVIDIA, is that what you mean?
Yeah, he gave them permission to send powerful chips to China. I don't know how to square that with the national security threat.
It's probably some sort of a trade deal,
Yeah.
and there's probably some sort of an assumption that it doesn't matter because everyone's doing it. And this is just another way to maybe balance out the tariffs or get some concessions on certain things.
Yeah, short-sighted.
It's very short-sighted, but I also think this this is kind of like an Oppenheimer thing, right? Oppenheimer didn't really want to make a nuclear bomb, but there's this conundrum. If you don't make it, the Nazis are going to make it. So what do you do?
Well, there's a second thing going on, the intellectual satisfaction of proving you can do it.
Right.
And that, is irresistible. And a lot of these guys, they'll cite Richard Feynman, the physicist, who they found on his blackboard when he died, if I can't build it, I don't understand it. So one of the positive things about this effort to create conscious computers, which is going on, I follow a group in the book who are trying to make a conscious computer. I don't think they're going to succeed, but even the failure is going to teach us important things about consciousness. It's a good way to understand something by trying to create it. And it'll force them to come up with definitions of consciousness and what the minimum requirements are for consciousness. And it may help us decide whether it is, a transmission theory, that we're tuning it in or it's generated from inside. So I think intellectually it's a really interesting project, but I think you need guardrails. So this guy who's doing building the robot that can feel, that has feelings because you can tear its skin. I asked him, I said, so will those feelings be real, that your robot's going to have? And he said, well, I thought so until I had this experience on 5-MeO-DMT. I said, what happened? He said, he described his trip in more detail than you need to know. And he says, and I realized there's a spark of the divine in us that no computer is ever going to have. But it didn't stop him. He's going ahead. He's trying to build it.
I don't know if he's right. I think there might be a spark of divine that these things don't have, but it doesn't mean that there are future versions
that might have it.
Especially when you scale out 1,000 years, 100,000 years, however long we're going to survive.
Yeah.
If these things do become sentient and autonomous and have the ability to create better versions of itself and have a mandate in order to do that to survive, I could see it becoming the superior life form. Not just that, beyond any comprehension of what we could even imagine the power of an intelligence to use and to harness in the universe. Like it could conceivably become something like a god. And I have this very strange theory about biological life in particular and intelligent life on Earth is that the reason why we have this insatiable thirst for innovation and the reason why we have materialism, the reason why we're obsessed with objects, even though we have a finite lifespan, is because that finite lifespan, if you thought about it, you wouldn't be interested in materialism, but materialism fuels this desire for innovation because you don't need a new phone, but there's a new phone that just came out. Aren't you going to get it? And so the more people get it and the more people want to show they got it, that sort of materialism fuels this innovation that ultimately leads to the creation of artificial intelligence. And I think it would always do that. I think it's bees making a beehive. And I think that's just what we do. I think it just takes a long time for us to create this artificial life. It might be why we're here. That might be our literal purpose in the universe.
To create our successor species.
Yes. And that might be how, well, obviously, like we're so flawed that we can't even imagine a world without war.
Yeah.
If you poll the average person, what are the possibility of war ending in your lifetime? Almost everyone's going to say zero.
Yeah.
It's a part of human nature. An intelligence unshackled by biological need, unshackled by all the things that we have, our need to procreate, our need for social status, all these weird things that keep us moving in this strange world that we live in.
I would add weird and good things. But
some
anyway.
of them are really good.
Yeah.
Well, good for us.
Yeah.
Sure. Not so great for
Right.
the land that you trampled to put a foundation for the house that you've always dreamed of.
True, but I think our mortality is part of what gives meaning to our lives.